this panel to order. This is Research 7, and we have 3 dynamic speakers this afternoon, so we're all going to be enlightened and informed. And so let's get right to it in the interest of time. I'm going to introduce all 3 at the beginning, and then we'll flow from there. Our first presenter is Ms. Angela Porter, independent scholar from Minneapolis, Minnesota. And she will be speaking on the wasp, the snake, and the netter, and an examination of the relationship between the 3 symbols, 3 Kemetic symbols. Our second presenter is Mr. Asar Imhotep, and his presentation will be on the Afro-Symmetry Model and Paronymy, a structured analysis of language as a vehicle for culture creation among Negro-Egyptian speakers. And our final, last but not least, speaker will be Dr. Wosini Yafru, and he will be doing he's from Tennessee State University, and he will be presenting on Dr. Jacobs Carruthers' contribution to our understanding of Nile Valley civilization. And at this moment,
good afternoon. What's up, everyone? In true African fashion, I asked my elders, if I'm not getting enough feedback here, for permission to speak and continue. Appreciate it. The title of my talk is The Afro-Symmetry Model and Paronymy, a structural analysis of language as a vehicle for culture creation among Negro-Egyptian speakers. And I know this title is loaded, so I'm going to explain these terms as we go on. So I couldn't find a printer, so I will read basically my abstract from my phone, so I'm not ignoring y'all. And throughout, even when we speak, I'll be highlighting certain things. So I don't have a paper on this per se, but this is kind of a summary of certain features of my latest book. Is on Nesubiti, King in Ancient Egyptian, a lesson in paronymy and leadership. And so I'll read from the abstract. It is common knowledge that the ancient Egyptians were fond of what Egyptologists call punning, which is a form of wordplay that suggests 2 or more meanings, but by exploiting multiple meanings of words or of similar sounding words for an intended rhetorical effect. A better explanation of this phenomenon in ancient Egyptian is what linguists call paronymy. And a paronym is a word that is derived from the same root as another word, but has a different syntactic use. For example, perilous and parlous in English. Or 2, a word linked to another word by the similarity of its form. For example, preface is a paronym of Latin prefatio. The ancient Egyptians utilized paronymy to create many of the overall themes in their myths. A well-known example of, and I wish that I had the correct fonts up there, but for those who understand transliteration, hopefully you get the phonemes right as far as the Egyptian writing. Excuse me. The ancient Egyptians utilized paronymy to create many of the overall themes in their myths. A well-known example of paronymy can be found in the Coffin Texts, spell 1130, where the sun god, known as Ra, also known as Remi, which means the weeper, creates humankind, which is known as rmT.w, from his tears. If you pay attention, you will see that there's a similarity in, I don't know why this ain't working, or it's not bright enough. Well, anyway, the words Remi, Remech, Remiyet sound similar. And because they sound alike, the ancient Egyptians felt that there was a connection between these words, and it inspired them to create a myth that argued for the consubstantiality of humankind with God. In other words, we were one with God, we were birthed from God's tears. So the similarity between the sounds of the words inspired a myth. And so this is going to be critical as we move forward. Here's another example of such a paronymy in a different African context. And so I'll just read from this particular article. And I have in bold what I want you to kind of really hone in and pay attention to. So the Adu mudfish or catfish is used in the ancestral sacrifices as well. The sentence is probably an unconscious quotation from a standard prayer formula in which, for grammatical reasons, the demonstrative particle a follows adu. In the example, niho hadu a. This produces a neat bilingual pun on the well-known Hausa word adua, meaning prayer. Thus, the sentence contains the double entendre, the fish that is called prayer. So you see what happened here is two separate words, but because they sound similar enough, they saw a relationship, and now the catfish, which is called adu, is also called prayer. But they're two separate words. It's folk etymology as it regards the common people. And so, and I'll continue. The mere similarity in the pronunciation of these words was enough to suggest in the ancient Egyptian mind a relationship between these concepts and thus a theme for the myth emerges. This presentation argues that the phenomenon is not isolated in ancient Egypt, but is common across Africa, as that one example demonstrates. It is this linguistic practice that is responsible for not only many of the cosmological myths across Africa, but for the emergence of certain social practices and cultural motifs that come to identify African culture in general. This is explained by processes discovered during the reconstruction of the Negro-Egyptian language family, for which the ancient Egyptian and many other modern African languages is a member. For those who don't know what Negro-Egyptian is, the current consensus in linguistics is that the ancient Egyptian language belongs to a language family or phylum called Afro-Asiatic. Theophilo Obenga is a starch opponent of the Afro-Asiatic language family labeling and Egyptian being a part of it. In 1993, Theophilo Obenga published a book in French, and I'll just say the common origin of ancient Egyptian, Coptic, and modern African black languages, or modern African, Negro-African or black African languages. Introduction to African historical linguistics, translated from the French. And in this particular text, he proposes a language family called Negro-Egyptian. And the reason why he named it Negro-Egyptian is because the linguists, the Eurocentric linguists, were trying to argue that Egypt language came out of Asia and that it was a Caucasian language that was just adopted by some darker skinned Caucasians that we know as the Egyptians. So to make a political statement and to make something scientific, he named it Negro-Egyptian. So when we say Negro-Egyptian through this conversation, we're talking about a language family. And the word Negro is not being used negatively in a pejorative sense. In 2010, Theophilo Obenga's analysis was expanded by this linguist by the name of Jean-Claude Mboli, who wrote this text, The Origin of African Languages, and really kind of validated Theophilo Obenga's Negro-Egyptian language family. And so just wanted to introduce that there. And this is his model, for the evolution of the Negro-Egyptian language family, but we don't have time to get into that. And so, to explain the practice among Negro-Egyptian speakers, the author, me, has developed what he calls the Afro or African Symmetry Model, which is a theoretical framework designed to guide the production of knowledge as it regards the psychological formation of certain African spiritual, cultural, and artistic conceptualizations, practices, and motifs that define African civilizations. Symmetry here refers to the similarity or the exact correspondence between different things as captured in the language. This is an integrative thought process, which is the opposite of what we find generally among Indo-European speakers. Thus, given any two objects, the Indo-European speaker seeks to primarily detect what separates them, while the Negro-Egyptian speaker tries to discover their points of convergence in an effort to unite them into a single entity that contains and explains each component. For the Negro-Egyptian speaker, the two objects or concepts, if found to have been have a perceived commonality, are seen as manifestations of the same reality and are complementary. This, for example, would explain why the goddess Ma'at, for example, who is associated with truth, justice, righteousness, and order, is depicted with wings and feathers. And people always wonder, why does she have wings and feathers? That's because in the ancient Egyptian language, there's words that are that sound like Ma'at, but is not what we think. And so we have Ma, meaning a duck, with birds, and then we have Ma'u, wind or breeze, and then we have Ma, to sail. And this is significant because in African languages, feathers, wind, breath, blowing are all come from the same root. No matter what word is used, that same semantics exists for those words. And so we can see in these examples, this comes from a linguist by the name of G.J.K. Campbell Dunn, Who Were the Minoans, an African Answer, where we can see, for example, the word papa, feather. And these are closely related Bantu languages for the most part. Pa, wing, and Sumerian. Poof, wind, blow. She mentioned apep earlier. That word apep comes from this same root. It means, it deals with motion and chaos, so to speak. Even where you get the word typhoon from, and typhoon in Greek and things of that nature, because a strong wind and destruction. So for fitted, to blow, we can see all that. I'm just trying to point out that the same word for lungs, wind, breeze, feathers, pigeon, dove, they all come from the same root. So when you see Ma'at with those wings and things, that's because there's other words in the language that represent this. And so they associate it with Ma'at because it sounds just like the word Ma'at. And so it explains again why you see Kepperer with bird feather wings. And so this is, from Chiluba Bantu, so you say Chipepu or Chipepula for Kepper, that's the cognate for it. Kukupepa, Kupepala, blow, being carried by the wind, and things of this nature. So when you see this symbol, Kepperer represents wind, and so it's what's carrying the sun. It's like the wind's carrying the sun across the sky. And so when you understand the languages, you get a better sense of the underlying theme here. And so in this presentation, I will demonstrate how paronymy was used in early Negro-Egyptian to develop a semantics or a worldview that translated into experience among Negro-Egyptian speakers various ideas, ritual practices, motifs associated with the king, known as the Nesubiti. For example, the crown, the staff, she spoke about the staff earlier, leopard skin, and the throne. These motifs associated with the ruler have been borrowed by Indo-European speakers and are now common emblems that identify the office of king. However, it is only through the language family of Negro-Egyptian and the processes of paronymy that explains the reason for their synergy and association with kinship. And so I end that. And so what I want to deal with here is the motifs that you see with the king. The concept of a king and the motifs of a king in amongst Indo-European speakers were borrowed from Africans. You have to wonder, why is a throne, why is a staff, why is the speckled garment or a crown associated with a king? What inherent about it makes it associated with a king? Paronymy explains all of this in early Negro-Egyptian languages. And so this is what we'll deal with. And so we can see, of course, the pharaohs. This is the Nesubiti Ai performing an opening of the mouth ritual, which is still done in the Congo today, for the Nesubiti Tutankhamen. And you can see the leopard skin. You can see the pharaoh holding a baton, a different variation of they have baton, staff, spears. You always see that in the hands of kings, everywhere. And we see the same thing amongst the Zulu today. Leopard skin, okay. Leopard skin or cheetah skin, garments, holding the staff. You see the same type of headgear that you see on the pharaoh over here on the far left. And if anybody knows about Zulu, jewelry at the top, you see that same, I don't think it's in this picture, an example, but you see those same type of necklaces amongst the Amazulu in South Africa. This is a kind of a Pan-African thing. And so we have to wonder, how is this associated with people so far into South Africa that we see the same things in Northeast Africa in ancient times? And so a little bit of linguistics here. In linguistics, to demonstrate a relationship between two or more languages, we often compare the terms, and what we look for is regular sound meaning correspondences between the phonemes. The ancient Egyptian language, they did not write out their vowels, so we have to compare the consonants. And there's certain things that, it may not look like these are the same words on the surface, but when we do these kinds of exercises, it demonstrates that they come from a common ancestor. And so when we say Ngolo in Chikongo, in Kemet, we say ba, but that capital A is really not an A sound, it's an R. It's a nasalized uvular trill, and it corresponds with L or R in most other languages. So when you say ba, it's supposed to be like a ba, almost, I can't really say it, but like the R in French, it's like a guttural R, like hara, like when they say rouge in French, or rouge, I should say. It's kind of that R, in which in certain dialects it'll turn into an H, or some dialects it'll turn into an L or an N or whatnot. So when you talk about force, mighty, and power and force, these are the same words. We see the same thing with the leopard, ngo, which of course that ng sound corresponds to the B in leopard skin, leopard, panther in ancient Egyptian. And also in ancient Egyptian, the B sound and the M sound interchange. And so this is the same word here as leopard and panther, but it's used now for lion, because the word fundamentally just means large, dangerous cat. And so we kind of narrow it down to panther and lion, but that's fundamentally what the word means. But the L or the nasalized uvular trill is dropped in this example in Chikongo or Kikongo. When you say Shango, priest, we say sim priest in ancient Egyptian, but this is the same, like if you ever heard of Credu Mutwa amongst the Amazulu in South Africa, he's a Sangoma. He's a sim priest. This is literally what that is, a Sango, is a priest. And so because these words sound alike in general, these concepts are associated with the king, because they also sound like words for king. But we'll deal with a different example in a minute. And so we have this reconstructed form, ngu, which became M or B in other languages. And so this reconstructed is for Negro-Egyptian. But we can see this is just for comparative purposes here, but I'll skip that. As I said, the similarity between certain concepts is a result of paronymy, and certain words sounding alike for the king. And as a result, this is how we get this idea that the king is someone with magical powers who is a priest who wears leopard skins. So all across Africa, amongst Negro-Egyptian speakers, they will always talk about the king having these powerful magical words. They wear leopard skins or spotted outfits, and they are usually the head priest in any general society or whatnot. But it's all based on paronymy in a very early stage. And so we have a few examples here, and I mentioned, why is a throne associated with the king? Because the word for throne sounds like the word for king. So we see a word for king is nesut. The plural in Egyptian is nesut or nesuit, thrones. We have heka, or is hakad, chief. You also have heka, stick, scepter, which is why a king holds a scepter in his hand. We have Hindu commanders and Hindu crown. In all these languages, you'll find a word that sounds similar to the word for king or chief. They'll use that emblem and associate it with them strictly because they sound alike. That's just the basis of it. There's nothing real spectacular about it. And so some other words that sound similar to the king, you always see a king with some kind of mace or a spear or thing to this nature. And so, this is all words that sound like the nesut, and this is why you see the king always with this example. And so I want to end with a living example from the late Dr. Kimbwadinde Kia Bunseki Fukiao, who wrote the text African Cosmology of the Bantu Congo. In this text, that's a different lecture, but I want to show you Mboli and Ma'aten in the Congo. But in this particular, these set of pages, he goes through the cosmology of the Bantu Congo. And he talks about the god Kalunga. And he talks about all of these different associations with Kalunga. And I don't have time to read all of these, so I'll just skip, but I'll just say Kalunga is known as a complete force by itself. He emerged within the Mbongi. He became a symbol for force, vitality, and more. He's also associated with water, immensity. Again, he's the ocean. He's the principal god of change. How did all of these associations get associated with Kalunga? These are the key, the terms in Kikongo that he mentions in his text. And so, in Langa, which is the line which you saw that diagram, it's the line basically that would separate the living world from the duat or the underworld. And Bungi is that empty space, is what we would call the Nun. And then you have Kalunga, the fire force, Kalunga, completely complete being, Kalunga, ocean, waters, Kalunga, principal god of change. The reason why all of these different things are associated with Kalunga is because when you look in the Kikongo language, you can see words like lunga, to come to amount to be complete, in number, to be exact, just, accurate, right, perfect, complete, lunga, to mind, to take care of, keep watch after, protect, guard, lunga, a smithy, a forge, foundry, a gale blast, a strong wind. Remember, we were talking about wind and evolution and change. That's what Kepler is. It's the same thing amongst the Kikongo speakers. I'll be quick with this. Skillful seeing, to flow, heap up, plenty, much, or mass. Remember, dealing with intensity, Kalunga. But you see all these words have the word lunga in there. But these are totally separate words. But because they sound alike, now they are converged, and now they're associated with the god Kalunga, which has that root Kalunga in it. And so, again, Kalunga, ocean, lunga, light, to make or blow fire. And you find this all across Africa. So a lot of these, alleged multi-layered meanings for these terms and these gods and goddesses and deities are all the result of words sounding alike. So these words sounding alike inspires myth, inspires creative motifs that are associated with these deities. So the Afro-Symmetry model looks at ways and how to detect this. And one way is we look through the language and paronymy. So I'll end it with that. I don't think I have any more slides. Thank you.